And we're back. Got my coffee. Nice early morning video. Ah, that's lovely. So, this morning, or whenever I guess you are going to be listening to it, and I apologize, I got bugs flying around me and everything, but I wanted to go over two examples of either literature review or an actual project, research project. Now, the examples I'm going to give, one is a dissertation that one of my colleagues and one of my good friends actually did when we were in grad school. And then another one was a student that I had, a master's student when I was working in Texas. He was doing a training type of study, but I'm going to go through some of the aspects of it. And I'll also be putting these up online too. Now, keep in mind, can't use these and copy and paste and all that stuff. This is just for reference, obviously. So, without any further ado, let me go into the first one here. I think I just had a bug on my glasses. Oh my goodness. Okay, so this is a caffeine study. So this was caffeine timing and cycling performance. So for this one, I really wanted to dive a little bit more into the literature review portion of it. So this would be considered the chapter 2 of the project. All right, so this was a big study that he did, and this was for his degree. We all do it when we go through a PhD and also a thesis as well. It could be slightly different. Sometimes it's actually maybe just as much or more involved, but for this one, this was a dissertation specifically. So let's go ahead and get into this. So I'll skip through some of it. He does have an abstract here, which we're not going to go into quite yet. Some acknowledgments. You get a table of contents in there as well that you may or may not actually need to put in there. Now, I do want to touch on this. If you were to go through a full thesis or dissertation, you're going to have a chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, possibly 5, depending upon how it's set up. Mine was only 4. Had the normal 3 chapters, and then at the end, it was actually just writing it like it was a regular manuscript that I was going to publish or send off for publication in a journal. So I didn't really have a chapter 5. Chapter 1 is basically an introduction. Chapter 2 is going to be your literature review. Then chapter 3 is your methods. And then chapter 4 for me was that paper, but it could be your data, results, and then your discussion, conclusion, all that. It's going to be chapter 5. But really, for the literature review, if you pick that specific topic, it's your chapter 2, basically. Now, you can have an introduction, which would technically be your chapter 1, and it's perfectly fine. In fact, it's I would encourage that, to have some sort of introduction to the topic. But you don't necessarily need to label it as chapter 1 and chapter 2. You can just put it as introduction to whatever the topic may be. So this chapter 1 was just an introduction to the topic. And towards the end, there was the purpose of the study. So that's going to be technically left out if you do just the literature review. If you do a study, that's you should put that in there. What is the purpose, and what is your based upon the literature that has been done and that you have looked up, that other people have performed, and from their data, what kind of hypothesis are you going to come up with? So moving on then to chapter number 2, which is kind of the meat and potatoes of it. So chapter number 2, review of literature. So obviously he was doing caffeine, or he was looking at caffeine. So he starts off with pharmacokinetics. So how is it metabolized? What does the body do with it? So right off the bat, you can see that we have headings. We have pharmacokinetics as kind of the major heading, and you can bold these and capitalize the entire word if you want to. You can set it up however you would like, but try to at least bold the headings and even subheadings within this. So pharmacokinetics, and then the big area under pharmacokinetics, you have the absorption and distribution of it within the human body. Then there's metabolism and elimination or excretion. However, we're going to get rid of maybe some of the waste from it. Some of the mechanisms then, diving a little bit deeper into what is going on within the body, especially with something like caffeine, the central nervous system, which is where it's going to be really hitting us for the most part. It's kind of strange. I'm talking about caffeine and I'm also drinking coffee at the same time. I tend to do that quite a bit, I guess. But we got substrate availability. So we're looking at mobilization of maybe fats, possibly carbohydrates, depending upon what research you're looking at. Some more topics: excitation, contraction coupling, and calcium release. I think I talked a little bit about this in XPhys and how it can possibly maybe lead to maybe a little bit more muscular contraction, calcium release with that. There's some other things there that could possibly happen. Effort and pain reception. So you can see these different topics within here. And these are all under the pharmacokinetics, that kind of bigger heading of pharmacokinetics of how the body is responding to this ingestion of caffeine. So if you were to do a supplement, if you were to look at a supplement, then you need to have some form of this in here. You should have some form of this of how's the body even respond to it? How's it break it down? How's it absorbed? How do we digest it? How do we excrete it? There should be some of that in there. Now, the next section, next big heading is caffeine and running performance, because he was looking at caffeine timing. And so that caffeine timing was, when is it better to have caffeine during a certain exercise? He was actually looking at cycling, but there is running performance in here. So even if you were to pick an exercise, maybe it was running or cycling, could be swimming, rowing, whatever the exercise might be, you can add in different exercises. In fact, there might be a lot of a big body of research on another type of exercise, and you need to possibly include some of that as well. But hopefully there is something else that is dedicated to that type of exercise, mode of exercise that you're maybe going to be looking at. So we have the running performance, and then we have the next topic, which gets into his specific area, which was caffeine and cycling performance. So we have cycling to exhaustion with this. And in fact, I believe that's what he was doing in this. That was one of his methods. And a big section on this, cycle time trials, and then more of that, and then work and power output. And then with this, he was really looking at caffeine ingestion and the power output the work and power output that could be generated by ingesting some caffeine during certain modes of exercise. And then caffeine timing and cycling performance. Another big area or topic underneath this. And that was kind of it. And then you can see at the very end here, there is a summary paragraph. So towards the end of your literature review, you should have at least one paragraph, possibly 2 or 3 paragraphs that kind of sum up what you just wrote or typed. I don't think you're probably going to write it. You're probably going to type it. So sum it up to a nice, neat little bow. I got moths flying around. I apologize. I'm not good enough to edit all of those out, but so have a nice, neat summary section to kind of sum everything up that you just talked about in the previous, 13, 14, 15 pages, however long that was. So that's that. Pretty simple. I mean, you can set it up similarly to this in that, let's go back to the beginning of this. Well, I guess this one section here where you have this major heading of caffeine and cycling performance. And again, insert your topic. It could be anything. Maybe it could be, oh boy, I don't know. Let's just go out on a limb and just say steroids in muscle building. Right. So let's So you could say steroids and maybe hypertrophy under this. And what are some of the subsections to that? So what is muscle hypertrophy? What are steroids? How is it metabolized? And then start going into maybe some of the research that goes into some of that. And then there's obviously a lot of different topics you can go into off of something, especially a topic like that. A lot of things you can go into. So that is, in a nutshell, a literature review. So again, I'm going to be putting these up online on Blackboard. You can view these. You can kind of look at them. The other thing I want to point out too, and it's the same with the other one that I will do or look at here, is that notice how he cited his sources. He cited them within the text. So for this one, numerous factors, including age, and then he listed the authors and the year that publication was put out. Same thing here. Callahan, Robertson, Bramfman, Gamish, and Neisser, 83. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is down here, McLean and Graham, 2002. So that is those are the authors, and then the year in the parentheses of when the article was published. Now, here's the thing: is there are a lot of professors, and I guess good that they do this. I'm a little bit different. You guys know that. I don't care how you cite. I don't care if it's APA, MLA, Chicago, however you want to do it. As long as the source is there in the text somewhere, somehow, either with the author's name and the year it was published, or if it's a subscript number. So if you read some of the journals, you'll see at the end of a sentence, you might, or maybe even in the middle of the sentence, you'll see a subscript 1, 2, 3, whatever it might be. Or if it's in parentheses at the beginning or the end of the sentence, that's perfectly fine. As long as it is consistent throughout the entire paper. That's all that I care about. And the other thing is, as long as you also have it in the reference section, that's another important part with that. So again, it doesn't matter how you cite it. You can do the subscript. In fact, you can even do superscript if you wanted to. Superscript numbers. So whatever the number corresponding to that particular source would be, put that in the sentence or at the end of the sentence, and making sure that it corresponds with the correct number in the references. Or you can do the authors in the year of the publication. Just as long as it's consistent, that's all that I really care about. So just make sure that it is consistent. Now, once we get to the reference section, one thing I do want to say about this as well is there's a lot of different ways you can do this. Two of the most popular ways are alphabetical order and order of appearance. So order of appearance in the text. Either way is fine. Again, I don't care which one you use. Just make sure it's consistent and make sure that those numbers are corresponding. If you use the numbers, make sure they correspond with whatever the number is in the reference section. Now, here's the thing about doing it in order. I would recommend, and this is how I've wrote in the past. I would recommend putting the authors in when you first write it and write the drafts. Do it so that the authors are there within the text, or find some way to make sure you're able to keep track of it if you're doing it in either way, either alphabetical order or in order of appearance. Because let's just say, for instance, your first reference, whether it's alphabetical order or not, your first reference never changes. And then your second one, and then maybe third one through 10, 12, 15, whatever it might be. That's great. But what if you find one more that is a B or one that is getting put into the first paragraph of your paper. Now, number 1 might stay the same, but number 2 through 15 might have to shift down, possibly. And if it's in alphabetical order, things can get really messy with that. So just make sure to keep track of them, where they're at, how you're doing it. There's some programs that actually do all of this for you as well. But just make sure it's consistent, make sure it's correct within the text and in the reference section. That's all I care about. So let's move on to the second one. All right. So the second one I'm looking at here, this was actually by RJ Gabo. He was a master's thesis student under me when I was in Texas. Formed a really great study, training study, actually. This title was Post-Activation Potentiation Effect and the Maximum Power Output of Supermaximal Effort Through a Partial Range of Motion. He was a strength conditioning guy, super awesome dude, did a really good job on this project. So let's go through some of the aspects of it that I want you to know. Now, the abstract. An abstract is something that you're going to write. It's going to be at the very end. Once everything is completed, basically you have the paper written, then you write the abstract. That's the easiest way to do it. You can't write the abstract before you perform the study. You can't write the abstract before you do the data analysis. Well, you could do parts of the abstract, but the abstract itself is basically just, again, a synopsis. I've kind of talked about this before. It's just a synopsis of what's happened. It's just a nice, short, nice little package of what's going on here. So usually there is an intro sentence or maybe a purpose sentence, such as here, tells what they did, who they were, and some of these numbers here. N is always going to be the number of participants. Sometimes it can be broken down to males, females. The total number N just itself is going to be everybody together. And then from there, what the study was aimed to do, some of the other methodology behind it, the important methodology behind it, and then some of the data analysis and the results from it. So the results determine significant average and velocity and average power for gender, post test. And we'll get into some of these significant numbers later. This is actually a really good significance number, 0.001. If you know anything about statistics, 0.001 is really, really good. 0.05 is usually our standard of the limit. Anything less than 0.05 is really good. And this one is 1,000th, right? So then from there, it's just somewhat of a short discussion conclusion, a wrap up of the findings of the study. So that's pretty much it for the abstract. I mean, it's a nice short little paragraph of what was going on and what happened. All right. So this one, I want to, maybe I didn't mention it before. This one is for, in particular, if you're looking to actually do a study and do the project. So the introduction, it's going to be just a short introduction. It's going to be basically the lit review that I want you to write. Even if you're doing the study in the fall, I still want you to write this. Maybe a little bit more of a lit review than what would generally be required to publish a paper, but I want you to have a little bit more written for it. So you're going to have an intro, and this is going to include all of the literature review and the references. Now, this one, he chose to use the parentheses at the end of the sentence. And this was actually because the publication, the NSCA journal that he was looking to publish it in, that's what they required. Some of these publications require a certain type of reference method. So just keep that in mind, that even if you have something so perfect in one certain type of citation, you may have to completely change it if you want to publish it in a certain journal. And some journals don't even go by some of the more popular, like MLA or APA style. Some of them have their own that's somewhat of a mix or some sort of variation on them. So just keep that in mind, that you may have to change it in the future. And that's why it's good. There are programs to change it automatically if you want to, but it doesn't take too long as there's not 100 or 200 different references in there, but it can still somewhat be time consuming, but it's not too bad to go back and change some of it. But anyway, so we had the intro. This intro is only a couple pages long, but yours is going to be much, much, much longer than that. So, 10 or 12 pages or so, because it needs to be a longer literature review. If you're doing the study in the fall, if you're doing it in the summer, if you want to do something in the summer, then it can be shorter, 3-4 pages, because you're also going to have a method section. This method section is going to have exactly what you're going to do. So what is it? What is the study? We'll get into some of this with the stats and how to set up the study with the ANOVA and all that stuff later, but it details what he was going to do. So on day 1, participants can be tested, 1 repetition maximum. And then day 2, 4, 6 says what they were going to do, and so on and so forth. So it says exactly what the participants, the subjects, were exposed to, what the variables were, who are the subjects, what is repetition maximum, how are you actually testing 1 repetition maximum. That's kind of important in something like this, because there's a lot of different variations of a 1 rep max and how to actually perform it and with different various exercises, but also what are some of the safety precautions that were taking place in it, and so on and so forth. But anyway, had that, the back squat protocol. What is the back squat? How is it actually performed? Maybe a background of some of the biomechanics behind it and all that good stuff. And then the bench press protocol. That was another test that he was performing. So every single test that you were going to perform, you need to have a heading and say, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. This is the equipment that we are using. In this section, anytime you have equipment that you are using, try to find a study or two that is backing up the validity of that piece of equipment. Some of the equipment that we have, that we're getting in the lab, I have some papers on it, and there's papers on a lot of this stuff that show the validity of the data that's actually coming out of a lot of those types of equipment. So as long as everything's calibrated properly, it should be fine. But making sure that you have some sources there validating that equipment. The statistical analysis that is going to be performed, or that was performed, which brings up a good point. When you are in this writing process at the start, you are going to be writing in the future tense. We are going to do this, or the study will be doing this, or the researchers will be doing this. The subjects will be coming in then. The methodology will be this. So it will be. Now, once you write the paper, once everything is done and data is collected, you need to go back and turn everything into past tense. The subjects came into the lab during this time. This was the amount of subjects that we had, or this was the data that we seen. It was past tense. You already did it. So before you do it, it's future tense. After you do it, it's past tense. So should make sense. So statistical analyses, what were the stats? And then the results. The results section is just simply data. It is the geek. It is the geek out part of the paper. It's getting into the nitty gritty stats of this. There's no discussion in it. There's no opinionated thoughts. It's just simply, what was the data? What did it say? What did it show? If there's any tables, make sure to include those. And I'll go into some of the tables, some aspects of maybe tables and figures later on as well. And if you need some help with that, we can obviously make some of those if you need to. And then the discussion section. The discussion section is simply just a sum up of what happened, why you think it happened, referencing back to, and you can see the numbers in the parentheses here, referencing back to some of those same sources that were in the introduction or the literature review and showing this is what we seen, and this is also what these other people seen, or conversely, this is what they seen versus us. Maybe it was different, and trying to physiologically explain why maybe it was different, or explain why it was possibly similar. So the discussion section can be somewhat lengthy depending upon the nature of the study. Sometimes there can be a section known as the practical implications. These practical implications are simply, well, how can we even use this in the real world? How can we use it in a training setting with a team? Can we? Are we going to be able to just smoothly transition from this is the research, this is the data, this is the results? Okay, how can we use this in sports, in training, at least specifically for this particular study? And then after that, there could be a conclusion possibly as well. But then there was the reference section. And again, he used the numbers. He didn't, and he actually put them in alphabetical order, not in order of appearance. So again, just being careful that if you're doing alphabetical order, such as in this case, he had to, because that was the publication rules, doing it alphabetical order, but also using the numbers in the sentences in the text. Just being cognizant of if you put in another author somewhere that is in the middle somewhere, you're going to have to change the rest of them. So just be aware of some of that. But again, as long as everything is, for my purposes, for this class, as long as everything is consistent throughout the entire paper and the references, totally okay with that. All right, that was a little bit of a summary there with the literature review, as well as possibly writing a paper or doing the project portion. Keep in mind, if you're doing the project, the literature review does need to be a little bit longer than what was shown here. It needs to be, I forget what the total amount was. Well, the total amount for the actual paper itself is going to include, it's going to be a little bit of maybe like an intro and some methodology in there. So that could be a few pages. So you're looking at 8 to 10 pages probably for that. For the literature review, if you're just doing the literature review, again, that needs to be the 15 pages, double spaced. I have all the rules there in the syllabus. So anyway, if you have any questions, any comments, anything, if you need to meet live on virtual space, but haven't had enough coffee yet. Need to meet virtually, or if you need to meet in my office, just let me know. We can talk about it. So if you have any questions, just let me know. Take care.